20 years ago, Jung Chang's book Wild Swans, about her own, her mother's and her grandmother's lives amid the turbulence of 20th century China, became a worldwide bestseller. She followed it up with Mao, a devastating 900-page biography of the man she believes was a tyrant. Now she's turned her attention to another towering figure in Chinese history, the Empress Dowager Cixi, who was the effective ruler of China for almost 50 years until her death in 1908. Was she, as popular legend has it, a tyrannous despot, or was she in fact an extremely effective practical politician and a modernizer? Jung Chang, your central character, Cixi, was a remarkable woman because at 16 she became one of the emperor's concubines. When he died, she was just 25. Her son became emperor in name, but she engineered a coup against the regents, who in theory were supposed to rule the country, and took control herself. Now, she was nothing else. She was an astonishing natural politician.
Yes, she was. She was actually a politician in almost a rather modern way. I mean, not her coup, but her coup was a very popular one because she got rid of 8 regents appointed by her husband, and she made herself the de facto ruler. I mean, these regents were going to carry on with her husband's policies and the previous empress policies to keep the doors of China closed.
And these have been disastrous because Western powers had invaded in the Opium Wars, defeated China. China was not doing well under this policy.
And was disastrous. I mean, under her husband, because of his policies, the old summer palace got burned down.
But because she was a woman, she could not take power openly, and she was literally the power behind the throne because her son, the emperor, would sit in the throne, and she would actually run meetings of the council from behind a yellow screen. Yes. They didn't see. They weren't allowed to look at her.
Yes. Well, there is a picture in my book, which shows the audience hall. I mean, at the time, China had strict male-female segregation, so she couldn't meet her male officials. The officials were all male, so she would have to sit behind the silk screen, and the officials would prostrate themselves in front of the throne, and her 5-year-old son would be occasionally put on that throne. But it was from that, almost crippling position that she proceeded to change China, and she launched the modern China.
Now, this is the key point of your book, and it's perhaps the most controversial one, because the standard view of Cixi is that she was a despot, a reactionary, villainous, indeed murderous woman, and the last thing you would associate with her, until the very end of her life perhaps, is a project of modernisation. You say she was a moderniser from the beginning.
Well, yes, because modernisation started in 1861, when she seized power. I mean, some of the achievements were acknowledged, they were common knowledge, but they were always credited to the men around her.
But her detractors do have something to be said for them. For instance, in 1900, there was this thing known as the Boxer Rebellion. A lot of Chinese peasants, effectively, very anti-Western, formed gangs which rampaged around massacring foreigners. As a result of that, the Western powers, America, Britain, Germany, Japan, all invaded. It was a disastrous war. Beijing was very badly knocked about. There was a lot of destruction, and Cixi herself had to flee with the court and didn't get back to Beijing for 18 months. Now, she backed the Boxers. That doesn't sound like the move of a pro-Western modernizer.
Right. She didn't back the Boxers for a very, very long time, until Western powers gave her an ultimatum and asking her to pronounce illegal this organization, which was xenophobic. She couldn't and wouldn't be seen as somebody who just did what Western powers told her to do. So she was facing the prospect of invasion. And then at this point, she misguidedly thought she could use the boxers to fight invaders.
So you acknowledge that that was a mistake on her part. What about something that happened right at the very end of her life? It turns out, we now know, she poisoned her stepson, who was the emperor at the time, to prevent him from succeeding after her death. That's Machiavellian to the most extreme degree, isn't it?
Well, the thing is this, the day before she died, when she knew she was going to die, she poisoned her adopted son, who was the emperor at the time, but who was her prisoner because he had been involved in a plot to assassinate her before. Now, she knew that if she had died and he was alive, China would land in the lap of Japan. And the reason is the Japanese had been trying to turn her adopted son into a puppet of theirs. They had been trying to kidnap him.
Why was it that her successors, as rulers, successive rulers of China in the 20th century, were so keen to blacken her name?
Well, I mean, after she died, 3 years later, China became a republic. The leaders, the subsequent political forces in charge of China, first the nationalists, then the communists, wanted to say how they rescued China from her. She had made a mess of China. She was a despot. She kept China in the medieval misery, and it was they who had started the modernization and opened the doors of China. I mean, it's not true. I mean, compared to their rule, and particularly the communist rule, Mao caused the death of well over 70 million Chinese in peacetime. Compared to that, and her rule was incredibly benign. And today, I mean, just recently, I've been looking at Chinese web. The Chinese regime is trying to go back to Mao's days, because the Chinese regime today is facing very much she faced in the last years of her life, which is decades of economic development, bringing prosperity and rising expectations. And they have to decide where to go next. The current regime in Beijing decides to go back to Mao's time. And she decides to push ahead, not wind the clock back, but to push for political reforms. She introduced the Western legal systems, she created a free press, and she wanted to introduce the vote to China, to turn China into a constitutional monarchy like Britain with an elected parliament. And unfortunately, she died when she just started her project. But in her will, she said this is really what she really wanted to do, that China belongs to the Chinese people.
Jung Chang, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.